Hey everyone, how are you doing? This is Mohammed Tahir Razal. I am a web developer, but I specialize more on the front end side. If you've been following me on LinkedIn, I've been recently posting a lot about accessibility stuff, about how to make your website accessible. Uh, but mostly I've been talking more on the theoretical side of things, which is important. But I promised that I will get into the more practical side eventually. And this video will be exactly that. So thought that instead of like building an application from scratch and making it accessible from the beginning, uh, I want to go into the more realistic way, and like the more realistic real world scenario would be that you already have an existing application that is already developed and it's already deployed most likely, but it's not accessible at all. So your task will be to make it accessible. And this scenario, like you will encounter it a lot in real life because, like unfortunately, uh, most companies they don't care about accessibility when they are building their website, but then a couple of years later they realize that well, accessibility is actually important. So let's hire someone like you and ask him to just make the website accessible without breaking any of the existing stuff or changing any of the features. So yeah, that's exactly what we'll be doing here. The project that we'll be working on is a personal project of mine that I have built a couple of years ago. It's actually an interesting project. It's not your typical landing page website where you can just throw some labels here and there and it will be accessible. No, this project has a couple of interesting components that are might be a little bit challenging to make them accessible, but we'll see how we can manage that. Also, we'll learn about a very cool technique called the Roving Index. It's a very useful technique for adding keyboard navigation to some like to specific types of components. And of course, we'll fix a few minor traditional issues that you encounter on any websites. So yeah, I think you will learn a lot of useful stuff from this session. Uh, and yes, we can just jump right into it. So let's open the project. The project is available on GitHub, by the way, so you can pull that from there. The project is built using React application, and it was like bootstrapped using Snowback. Well, no, Snowback was a thing. No, it's not. Um, but anyway, we will not focus on any of the UI stuff or styling stuff or the logic of the application itself. Our main focus will be primarily on the accessibility things. So yeah, you don't need to like have a good knowledge about the code base or anything like that. Let's first just run the application to see what it is. Okay, so now it opens on localhost port 8080. Uh, as you can see, the application is called Maze Builder. It's like you have this grid of tiles. Tile by tile, I mean the square itself, where you can like select something from here. You can select the ground pieces. You can build the map however you want. The two red flags are the start point and end point. These blue circles are portals where like if you enter through one you can exit from any other portal on the map. These are holes where when you put them you cannot walk on there. So basically after you create whatever map you want, you click start and the application will find the shortest path for you between the starting flag and the end flag. So here like it went down, then it went through the portal and exited from the other portal to the flag. You don't need to like know anything about how this algorithm works. It basically uses BFS, by the way, if you're interested. But we don't need to know anything about that. We just need to focus on the accessibility stuff. So yes, that's basically the application. Also, you can like it has some settings here where you can, like for example, show the borders of the grid. You can also increase the number of the tiles in the rows and columns. The default is 8. But yes, that's I think everything from the application. So like when you get an application like this and you are tasked with uh, like make it accessible, um, the first thing you need to do is to identify what are the inaccessible stuff. Um, there are a lot of aspects for accessibility. There are keyboard navigation, screen readers, UI stuff, so that like colors, font sizes, whether it can be zoomed in or out. Uh, there are a lot of things. But in this video, we'll focus mainly on two things: the keyboard navigation and the screen readers compatibility. So let's first like try to see how much is it keyboard accessible or inaccessible. If we click on the application and by the way, let's just like create a simple create. No, okay. When you have a start and end flag, the start button will appear. Otherwise, it will be like hidden. So if we click like in the application, the way we can like what keyboard navigation means basically that you can operate the website fully using the keyboard. So like imagine that you don't have a mouse. The main button you will likely use is the tab key and the enter key. So if we press the tab key, you see that the start button is focused. If you press the tab key again, it's not very clearly visible, but the settings key is focused. If you press it again, the focus is being brought up to the browser buttons. So like actually the only two things that are being focused right now are the start button and the settings button. None of the toolbox items are being focused. The reason for that, if we inspect them, like because they are just div with images and text, they don't have anything that will like tell the browser that hey, these are tabbable. And the same can be said for the grid. Like the grid should like to be usable, the grid should be navigatable also by the keyboard, but also it's using simple divs and images, so it's also not keyboard navigatable. So let's start with that. We will tackle the issues one at a time. The first thing we can start with is making the toolbox keyboard navigatable. Let's go to its code. By the way, the folder structure for the project and how the components are organized, it's not very optimal, or actually it's not very good, because as I told you, it's an older project. So I built it before I really knew how to cleanly build a project. So like don't just think that this is the right way to build, to how you should structure your application. But like most of the components are put here in a folder called containers. Canvas is the main application basically. Grid is a grid component. Toolbox is the toolbox component. So and by the way, I'm using styled components library. I for this project I was like, for whatever component I create a style file and like put all the styles there. Most likely I'll call this object root and then I'll import it here in the component and use it. Okay, so the toolbox component, as I said, we don't need to worry about any of the logic for the application or how it's handling whatever stuff. We just need to focus on accessibility stuff. So here we have the root component, which is a div, a style div. Inside of it, we have the tools, the ground bees, the water bees, portal, whatever. We map over them, and we are creating a tool component for each tool. If we go to the tool component, it also uses style components. This is the root for that. If you look into what component we are using here in the style component, it's just a div. So here, just imagine that this is a div with some styles, for those who don't know what style components are. And it has a class name, and it has an on-click handler. Now, this is one of the things why... No, this is not very good, actually. Putting on-click handlers on divs is not a very good practice. It's actually a bad practice, because the browser has no way of knowing that this element is tabbable or clickable or whatever. It's like we are able to click it because we are adding listeners using JavaScript. But if we were to use the HTML native components that are meant to be clickable, like the button component or the anchor tag, these components are like focusable by default, and the browser knows that these elements can be should be focused by clicking on the tab key, and if you click on the enter key or space key, they will be, their on-click handler will be activated. So yeah, most of the times when you have something that is clickable, try to make it a native HTML button. Don't use a div or any other non-clickable element. So the fix for here is just go to the root component. Now here, styled components, whenever you want to create a styled component, you like call styled dot and some HTML element. Here we are using div. If we just turn it into a button, save, let's go back and see. Now, as you can see, I clicked the tab key and you see this focus ring around the button. If I click the tab key again, and if I click the enter key, the element is selected, the tool, and all we needed to do was just make it, instead of div, button. That's great. So let's now just, because it's an easy fix, let's also make this fix to the grid tiles or cells. Let's go to the grid folder. The grid folder, it also uses a root style div, and inside of it, for each grid cell, it has a tile component. This tile component also has a div that has an on-click handler. So instead of it being a div, let's make it a button. Save. If we go back to the application, let's tab to the grid. Now, as you can see, it's also the tab. Each cell is focusable on its own, and if we click enter, you will see that the tool has been used. Basically, the on-click handler is also called when we press enter or space. So yes, great. We are already off to a great start. This was a very easy fix, but like this is not still fully fixed. The reason why is because, like, imagine this: you are already here, and you want to go back to to change the tool that you are using. Now, the way you can right now do that is using Shift Tab. Click it like this, about 20 times. You go here, select the water bees or maybe the portal. Then you need to go back to the grid, to the cell that you want to place the tool to. And maybe if you want to change that again, you will also need to go back. This, of course, is not very nice user experience, having to go back and forth all these tabs. Like, the less tabs the user has to make to achieve any kind of target, the better. So now a better user experience for this would be to treat the toolbox component and the grid component as a single tabbable element, and inside of each of those components you navigate around using the arrow keys instead of tab keys. Basically, when you are focused here in the toolbox, instead of using shift tab and tab to go between the toolbox elements, I want to be able to use the arrow keys to go up and down. But if I press the tab key, instead of it, like here I'm focused right now on portal, if I press the tab key, instead of the focus being moved to the whole item, I want the focus to move immediately to the grid item, and vice versa. If I was on whatever grid cell here and I click shift tab, instead of the focus being moved to the previous cell, I want the focus to move immediately to the toolbox. And if I click the arrow keys, I want to be able to go up and down, left and right. I hope that's clear. So the way that we will be fixing this problem is by using the technique that we mentioned earlier, that is called Roving Index. Before we explain what Roving Index is, let's just we need to see one thing. On all HTML elements, you can add a property called tab index. This tab index property takes a numeric value, in the case of React, 0, 1, 2, 3, 10, -1. And depending on this value, a different tabbing behavior will be implemented for this element. Some elements by default has a tab index of 0, like button elements, anchor, links, input element, text area element, iframe, etc. This means that they are forkable and that they are by default in the tabbing tree, meaning that if we use the tab key, we can get to them one way or another. If we use another value like 1, 2, 3, 4, they will still be forkable and tabbable, but they will have higher priority. And it's not recommended that you use higher values in general. However, if you use -1 as the value for tab index, the element will still be forkable programmatically, but it will not be tabbable. Meaning that you no matter how much you press the tab key, you will not be able to reach this element. Okay. Most elements like h1 or h2 by default or div, they are neither forkable nor tabbable. So sometimes you may want to be able to click a button somewhere and bring the focus to some h1 element. So you put the value tab index -1 to it, meaning that you can go focus on it, but you don't want the user, if he clicks the tab key, you don't want focus to be around the h1 element. I hope that's clear now. So let's now explain what Roving Index does exactly. Roving Index, let's go back to the application and let's imagine that we will add the Roving Index here on this element. Right now, each of the element has a tab index of 0 by default. So that's why if we click tab, each one of them is forkable by itself. However, what if we make all the elements except for one? How about we make all of the elements tab index -1, and only one element has a tab index of 0? Okay. What this will make is that when we click tab, if we are out of the component and we click tab, only one element will be focused. If we click tab again, the focus will be immediately brought to the next tabbable element that is not one of those elements, because all of them are tab index -1, right? So like if we already did that, if we click tab, the focus will be brought here. Cool. But how can we like navigate through the other elements that has a tab index of -1? The way we can do that is by programmatically listening to the arrow keys. If the user, for example, click the arrow down key, we will change the tab index of all these elements. We will make all of them -1 and make the second element tab index 0. If we click the arrow key down again, we will make this tab index -1 and we'll make this tab index 0. So this way, at any moment, all of the elements will have a tab index of -1 and a single element will have a tab index of 0. We can do the same for the grid. We will have all the grid cells be -0 tab index except for one cell. And when we click the arrow keys, but here in this case we will also use the left and right arrow keys, we will change which element has the tab index of 0 and we will make all the other elements tab index -1. So now the way we can implement that is, let's go here to this component. Now we can of course implement this manually ourselves. We can like we will have a couple of state and a couple of refs, use ref, to keep track of all the elements in the toolbox container. We will have a ref for each element, and we will have a state that will remember which element was last focused, and we'll put a on key down listeners on each of the element, so that we listen to the up, down, left, right keys, and we will change the state using that. We can do that. However, there is already a cool library npm package that you can use, which implement this for you. It's called, I think, React Roving Index. Yeah, I think this one. Yeah, this one. It's very simple to use, and like it handles a few of the edge cases that you might encounter. So let's just download it. While it's downloading, yeah, I see an error because there is like some packages that are using legacy dependencies and they are not very compatible with newer packages. So to do that, you can pass legacy peer deps flag and download again. Or you can update the packages that are causing the problem, but right now we don't need to do that. So while it's downloading, let's take a quick look at how we can use this library. Here he explains about the Roving Index, if you want to read about that. So here is the user section. So basically, it has a hooks API. First, you put a context provider around the component that you want to implement Roving Index inside. In our case, the toolbox component, this is one element, and the grid component, that's another element. So you put a context around that. Then here, for each element, you use this use roving tab index hook. You pass it a ref that you also assign to the button. For example, in our case, it's also a button. So like you create a ref, you put it on the button, and you also send it to the hook. The hook will return a couple of arguments: tab index, focused, handle key down, handle click. These are parameters that you can set on the button element. The tab index, because it will be changed between 0 and -1, right? But the library will take care of that for you. You just need to put the tab index that the hook returns on the element. And this use focus effect hook, it will basically like see if the focused state of this item in the roughing index container changed. It will manually bring the focus to that. If you would like to take a quick look at the code of this library, I recommend that you do that. It's like basically nothing too complicated. It's very simple, and you will learn a couple of things by looking at that. So yeah, let's just do that ourselves. Let's go to the toolbox component here. Let's import the tab index provider. It's called tab index, or roving tab index provider. Roving tab index provider. Okay, now let's go into each button element. Here we need to do this part. Sorry. So we need to import useref and import this. It's not importing them automatically, so I'll copy this. Tab index and use focus effect. Okay, so this hook, the parameters that we need to pass is the ref to the button and whether it's disabled or not. In our case, our buttons will not be disabled at any case in the toolbox buttons, so we pass false. So now we need to also use the values that this hook return. So let's copy that here and let's paste them. Ref tab index disabled, we don't have disabled. On key down and on click. In our case, we already have an on click that we still want to use. So for that to work out, as you can see here in their example, they say that if you already have an event handler that you want to run on click, you need to call both handlers, the handle click returned by use roving tab index hook and your own handler or whatever you want to do. So let's do that here. Let's copy this from here and put it here and pass the event to it. Sorry, I think I copied the wrong one. Handle click. Okay, so now if we go and test that, let's click tab. The focus is on the first tool. If we click tab again, instead of the focus being here, you see it has moved to the first cell in the grid item. If we click shift tab, the focus will be brought back to the tool. Now if we use the arrow keys up and down, they are not working. If we use the left and right will go down, left will go up. One thing to note, by the way, is if we click tab and shift tab again, the focus will be brought to the item that we were lastly focused on. To fix, by the way, the direction issue, here you can see that you can pass a direction property option to the roving tab index provider. The default one is horizontal. You can pass another value which is vertical, so it will use, instead of right left, it will use up down, and you can pass a third value which is both, so the up and right will act exactly the same. left and down will also act the other way. So let's, for our case, let's pass both value, options, direction, both. Go back. Now I'm using the up and down keys and they are navigating nicely. Okay, let's now add the same functionality but for the grid. The grid will be a little bit more tricky because like here they are only one direction. We are going from up to down, but in the case of grid we have four directions we need to navigate to. Thankfully this library also like handle the case if you are using a grid. As you can see, grid usage, for it to be working with a grid you only need to pass a third value for the use roving tab index hook. This third value is basically just the zero based index of the grid row. So basically if you go back here, this is the first row of our grid. All of these buttons should pass 0 because they are in the first row, right? The second row, all of the items here should pass a value of 1. All of the items here should pass a value of 2, and etc. Right? So let's do that. Let's go to the grid. First, let's import the roving tab index, not context, roving tab index provider. Okay, let's import it, copy it from here. Oh, what I copied previously has disappeared. Let's put this here. Roving tab index provider. Okay, now we need to add the hook for each of the grid cells. For that, we go to the tile component file. Here, each tile, as we saw earlier, it's a button. So let's add the stuff that we should copy from here, the hooks and their usage. This one. Let's click and paste. Also, let's import them again. I don't know, for some reason my auto import is not working. So use roving tab index and use focus effect. Okay. So we need disabled is also false. And here we need to pass, as we said, the zero based index of this cell, of this grid cell. How can we get that? Let's go back to the grid here. Now the grid component, basically, it treats the cells as a linear list of cells. Okay, like it doesn't. Grid flattened is not a two-dimensional array. It's a one-dimensional array where the grids are like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then like 9, 10, 11, 12, but they are being put serially. The reason they are rendered in a grid style is because I'm using CSS for that. Okay, so we need like somehow to pass to each cell component what is its row index and maybe its column index, but for now it's not necessary. So how can we pass what is its row index? we have the index value from the map function, like currently which item it is, right? So if it is the like the first item, then that would be 0. If it's the first item in the second row and we have 8 cells in a row, then its index will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then it will be 8, right? So the way we can get the row index is by saying index divided by how many cells we have in each row. This value is like we already use this value in a variable called dimension. Okay, so like for a 8 by 8 grid, this will be 8. So 0 divided by 8, 0. 1 divided by 8, 0. 2 divided by 8, 0. There will be a reminder, but we don't need it. So to get rid of this reminder, we can just say math.floor. So for all the items that are in the first row, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, divided by 8, there will be 0. Now if we go 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, divided by 8, there will be 1 point something. And we use floor, so it will be 1. Okay? So this way we get the 0-based row index for each item. While we are here, let's just add column index because we will likely need it. The way we get the column index is by saying index module the dimension. Now the reason for this is if you just look at this the grid, this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. For the column index, the second row, they will repeat 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right? So it's basically its index, whatever it is, module the dimension. Module dimension will remove all the unnecessary rows. Maybe you did not maybe I did not explain that very well, but like you don't need to really care about that. It's like just some math stuff that you can like find online if you need. So now we are passing the row index and column index of each cell. Let's go here and add these items as props. Row index number, column index number, and here let's receive them, column index, and let's pass row index here. The final thing we need to do is to assign these values to the button component of each cell. We can do that again the same way we did that earlier by copying these values and removing the unnecessary ones which are disabled, and putting handle click here, and yeah, that's everything. Save. Let's go back to the application and check if it's working. Now I tabbed, I'm in the toolbox, I tab again, I'm now in the grid. If I click tab again, you see the focus is on the start button. If I click shift tab, I'm on the grid. Now if I click right, it's moving right, down, left, up. If I click shift tab, then tab again, you see that the focus is being returned to the cell that I was lastly in. Okay, that's awesome for now. I think like we almost covered all of the things we need to do on the keyboard navigation side. Now like it can be like anyone using only keyboard can almost fully use the application. If you click on start now, you see the path. You can change your tool that you are using, or move around. Okay, great. Now we've got a fully keyboard navigatable application. I know it was not very easy, probably. There were a few new stuff, maybe. But if you just go over the code later slowly and you read more about roving index technique, maybe check how it's implemented inside the package or see a simpler implementation first, everything should be very easy and clear for you. Okay, now with keyboard navigation out of the way, let's look into the second thing that we want to handle, which is screen readers. Now, for those who don't know what a screen reader is, it's basically a software that can read the content of your screen and announce it using audio, or maybe sometimes using braille code or some other means. It's like usually they are primarily used by blind people or people with a very low vision. If the website is like built in a correct way where it's accessible, the screen reader would allow even a blind person to fully use the website and do whatever he wants, the same as a sighted person. There are a lot of like different screen reader tools. There are some popular ones. I am using NVDA, which is a free software that you can download and use yourself too. So yeah, I'll just like run it and see how we can use it. I hope that you can hear.
This one I've been talking about theoretical notepad.
Yeah, I think you should be now able to hear the narrator voice. Now, see for
Maze
example,
Builder.
if I hover, it says Maze Builder. Or if I
Maze Builder.
hover on the button,
Start magnifying glass tilted left button.
it said start, then it said magnifying glass, because basically it's spelled what this emoji is. If I use the tab key,
Whole button.
it said whole button.
Button.
Now I am on the grid cell.
Whole button.
Focus on the toolbox.
Button graphic water piece.
One thing just to note, by the way, if you are using NVDA and it's active, keyboard navigation will be partially broken because NVDA will intercept your keyboard events in its default mode. So to fix that, you need to click insert and space.
Water piece button.
What this basically means
Portal button.
NVDA will switch to what is called focus mode or sometimes forms mode, where it will not break your browser keyboard events. Just something to keep in mind. Okay, so now as you can see, if we click up,
Water piece button.
it spells the button not correctly right now, but we'll fix that. If we go to the grid,
Button.
It's saying this button. Now this is of course not helpful at all. If like potentially you should say like at least that this is a ground base button. This is C base button. And this is a ground button with a portal on it. This is a ground with a flag on it, and something like that. So yeah, we need to fix the toolbox to make it
ground piece
spelled correctly. We need to fix to make it announced properly. We need to fix the grid items, and of course, when we click start,
Maza Builder document blank.
The path that is found, it's not announced to the user. The user will not know that. Okay, what is the path? Maybe like we will see how we'll tackle that. Maybe like we will say that go from the start button down, then right. You enter the portal, then you go down. Maybe we announce the location of or like the coordination of the cells that the user should take, or maybe any other way. We'll see that. Okay, so let's get right into that. First, we
Ground
want to
piece.
make the tool items spelled correctly. By the way, one tip: if you like want to see what the label of some element is without navigating to it when your screen reader is active, you just
Menu selected sub. Mazza build alert dev tools is docked to right. Maze builder.
it's a little bit annoying.
Speech mode off.
So I'll turn it off when I don't need it. If you click here and on the inspect menu on the button element, and you go to the accessibility tab here, then you will be able to see what is the label of this element. So for example, in the case of this button, the label is ground width. When we hover over it, it's saying it's ground width. Also, when sorry for that. When you go to the accessibility tab, you will see what is the name that is being assigned to this element. So in this case, it's maze builder. If it's an element without a label, like this item, for example, the button here, if you check the accessibility, you will see that it's in an empty theme. So that's why when we were focusing on it, it was only saying button. It was not saying anything. So let's fix that. Now, if we go to the tool component, now, as you noticed, when we were focusing on it, it was saying water base. It was saying it twice. First, maybe you already know this, but where do screen readers figure the label of something from? There are several places. If you have a text inside the element itself that says something, it will read it as the label. If you have an area label property on an element, it will override any children text. If you have an image with an alt tag that has some text, it will also include it in the label. And as you might have noticed, that's the reason for our problem, because the title is water base or ground base or whatever, because inside each button we have the text for what the item is in the tooltip, but we also are using the title again in the alt tag for the image. So it's reading this, then reading this. That's why it's duplicated. So we can just remove the alt value and make it an empty. When you make empty value for an alt property of an image, you basically mean that it's just a decoration image, and it should not be used to use by the screen readers. Okay, save. Let's
Speech mode beeps. Speech mode talk.
Activate NVDA again.
Ground piece button. Water piece button.
As you can see now, it's saying water base button instead of water base.
Portal button. Hole button. Start/end flags button.
Okay, so now
Portal button.
it's spelling them correctly. One other improvement we can make to Toolbox, actually two other improvements, I think. The first one is
tool.tsx speech mode off.
First, for the Toolbox element itself, here, the div, we can add a property called role. This role, it could have, there are many roles that you can assign. One of them is Toolbox. This will not change any functionality immediately or anything noticeable, but the role basically, for some screen readers, they are when they say a specific role on some element, they can announce to the user that this page has a toolbox, for example. So or you can immediately navigate to the tool page if your screen readers, for example. Why is this useful if it does not change functionalities visibly? Because some screen readers make use of the role property on elements. They scan the page and they can see what elements with whatever roles are there, and they can announce that to the user. So they can say to the user that you have a toolbox element on this page. So maybe the user can immediately jump to the toolbox. Okay, instead of it being just a div, for example. There are several elements that have a role by default. So buttons have a button role. Inputs have a edit text, I think it was called, role. There are many roles actually, and like most likely whatever components you want to build, there is already a role for it, a standard role for it. So if you can use that, you should probably do. As I said, this will not have a visible effect right now. If we go another like improvement we can do, if we go to the tool element button itself, right now when we are navigating, it's only saying what this button is, but it's not announcing which button is currently selected. So the way we can do that is there is a property on buttons. I think it was already selected, maybe, or activated. Okay, we can pass it true or false. Let's check if it's working.
Speech mode beep, speech mode talk, ground piece, button, ground piece button, water piece, hole button,
Let's refresh.
Mazza builder, water piece button, Mazza build, clickable button, button, ground piece button, button, water piece button, ground piece button, tool, SRC containers grid components tile. C, suggest R, the editor is not accessible at the.
Now this property was called
dash
current,
the editor is not,
and we can pass it true or false. So
Mazza builder Google Chrome MTG, Mazza builder document, button, ground piece button current.
As you can hear, it says ground piece button current.
Water piece button, portal
For
button,
other buttons, just say the button. If we click on portal,
current,
it says current.
water, portal button current.
Okay, so now the user can hear and know which button is currently selected. He doesn't have to remember himself what is the current tool that he is using. Okay.
Tool.t to SRC, speech mode off.
Okay, so I think that's everything for the portal. For the toolbox. Now let's go for the grid. So how can we make this grid usable by someone who cannot see it? Someone who cannot see what is the current cell that we are currently selected, or what is currently placed in this cell. One way we could do that is by first announcing what is the coordination of the cell that we are currently focused on. So we can say, for example, right now we can say row 2, column 2. If we are here, we can say row 3, column 2, ground piece has portal, for example. I know this does not sound very easy to use, but I'm not sure if there are better ways to handle that. If you know of any better way, please let me know. But I think for now, this should be usable for some extent. So let's try to implement that. Let's go back to the code, to the grid. Now the first thing we can do is just add a role to the grid item itself. There is a grid role, by the way. And next, let's go to the tile components themselves. here. Here is the cell component. We want to add an area label here. Now, what do we want to put in this area label? As we said, we want to have, let's just put them here because there are a lot of stuff that we want to announce. We want to announce the position or coordination. We want to announce what tile it has. By tile, I mean water or ground piece. It has. What effect it has. The effect is basic. I know it's not a very correct wording, but by effect I meant portal, hole, start, and flag. So that's the three main things I want to announce. So how can we do that? Let's first do the position. Here in the area label, we can say something like row, and we want to announce the row somehow, and then column, column, and also announce the column somehow. Yes. Now, how do we get the row and column? If you remember previously, we passed the row index and column index when we were creating the roving index. So we can just put them here, row index. But the row index here is 0-based row index. But what we want to announce is the normal 1-based row index. Like it doesn't make sense for a blind normal user to hear row 0, column 0, right? So we use the 1-based index. By the way, one other way you can do that is to follow a similar style to the chess grid, where like you can do numeric based for the rows and A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H for the columns. So a cell will be announced like A3 or 5-7 or something like that. For like, this is one way, and I think it could work, but I think this doesn't make sense for someone who like already knows or memorize the grid naming. So I think for most users this should be easier. Okay, so let's now save that, go back, try to navigate. Let's
speech mode talk, row 1, column 3 button.
Okay, as you can see, it said the row and column.
Row 4, column 4 button.
Yes.
Tile.tsx maze build row 4, column 3 button.
There is some delay between, like it's saying row 4, column 3.
Tile.tsx maze builder Visual Studio.
Delay, let's just remove the, I think the colon, it will be spelled quicker.
Maza builder row 1, column 2 button.
Yes, now it's saying row 1, column 2 immediately without this pause between row and the number. It's up to you to decide which one is better. Okay, so now the position is done. We also want to now announce what is the currently selected grid. What is it ground or water, and whether it has something already put into it.
Tile.tsx maze builder visual speech mode talk, speech mode off.
For that, we can either add this information here in the area label, or we can okay, actually, you know what, we can add that in the alt. Okay, let's see something, learn something new. We can add this in the alt. Remember when we were like working with the buttons in the toolbox, I told you that if you put something in the alt, so the screen reader will read all the content alt properties. So we can do that here, because here we are saying like what is the tile, is it sea or water, and we are displaying an image. So we can also, like, in addition to the image, we can put the alt tag saying here ground or water. And if this cell has an effect, we are also displaying the effect image, which is the flag image or portal image or whatever. And we can also put here the alt with saying portal, flag, hole, etc. Let's do that. Now, how can we get like this? We can just create the tile value that we are getting here is basically if you go here, tile, itile, it's an interface with type tiles. Tiles here is an enum with two values, sea and the ground. We have another enum, tiles effect, portal, hole, flag. So to just like get a label out of the enum value, we can, like, the simplest way would be to create a map called tile to, let's call it map tile to label. Yeah, the key, they will be the values of the enum, which are ground and sea. The values will be what label we want to spell. So then we can put that here. Say tile. Tile dot type. We can do the same thing for the tile effect. Let's call it map tile effect label, tile effect portal, hole, and flag. Come on, flag, and that should be everything. So put them here and pass tile.effect. Okay, let's now remove this comment for 1 second. I want to show you one thing. Save, go back, switch the speech mode on.
Speech mode talk.
Now,
Row 1, column 2 button. Row 2, column 2 button.
as you can see, it's only saying the position. It's not saying it's not announcing the ground or water or anything like that.
Row 3, column 2 button.
Now, the reason for that,
Tiled
you know
grid.tsx.
it's because when you put area label, it overrides any of the content. It ignores any of the content inside of the component. It will only use
Tile.tsx maze builder Visual Studio application.
Okay, so how can we fix that? We either move this value from the alt tag and put it here, or we can move this value down into the content of the button
Space.
here, put it in spam, for example. But of course we don't want to show it.
Maza builder
So
tile
we want to hide it.
space C. The editor is not accessible at this R
We
dash.
can use a class called SR.
FY.
This is a custom class that I wrote. It basically hides it visually, but screen readers can still see it. So we save that. Go back.
Maza builder Google Chrome water flag. Row 1, column 2 water button.
As you heard, it said the position, then it said water button. Let's put here.
Row 1, column 1 ground flag button.
Row 1, column 1, ground flag button.
Row 3, column 2 ground portal button.
Okay. It seems
Row 3, column 3 water button. Row 3, column 1 ground flag button.
Okay, so now it's working nicely.
Water,
The last
ground.
thing we need to tackle is when we
Water,
Start.
Maza builder document
and the path is found, we need a way to announce that the user. So how can we do that? Let's go back to the grid.
Tile.tsx mate. Speech mode off.
Switch it off. Here, let's now let's just see when you click the button, a redux action is being dispatched, and the result will be here and stored in result.path. Okay, so what we want is to first get the path that we found, which will be stored in this path variable. Let's just log it out and see how it's formatted. Then we can think about how we can announce it to the user. Okay, console, clear. Okay, so this is what the path value is. It's an object with keys that are numbers and then a true value. What this basically means is that like these numbers are the zero-based index of the grid. Like the first, let's just put the flag on the first item and flag here, start, go down. So you see the first item is 0 because the first grid cell is indexed 0. The item below it, or the cell below it, its index is 8 because remember 0, 1, 2, 3 to the right, then we go down. The item below it is 16. If we put the other flag here, start, this is the path, 0, 8, 16, 17 because it went right. Then, as you can see, it's 23, 31. Okay, so how can we, like, this solution format is good for showing the these items, these polls that you see here, but they are not very useful for someone who is hearing the solution. So we need to format it in a better way. Also, we can do this in several possible ways. One of these, we could just like announce the coordinations of the cells that has the correct path in the order. So here we say the solution is row 1 column 1, row 2 column 1, row 3 column 1, row 3 column 2, row 3 column 8, row 4 column 8. Maybe there is like a nicer way to spell that. Maybe we can go for like row 1 column 1, then we go down down right, jump portal to grid cell row whatever column whatever, then go down. Maybe this is nicer. Maybe there is a third better ways. Let me know also if you think that there are a better way to do that. But let's go with this approach for now, where we announce the coordination of the cells that has the solution. Okay, so how can we do that? Like when the user click on the start button, we find a path, we want to let the screen reader know that, hey, screen reader announced this. For that, there is something that we can use. If we have, for example, a div, and this div has a property of aria live. This aria live property can take multiple values, polite, off, or assertive. Let's go now for polite. We'll explain what that means. What this property will do, it will basically let the screen reader know that, hey, screen reader, this is an element that has a content that might change. When the content changes, I want you to announce the new content. Maybe it's not the new content, maybe announce what was the old content. We can actually like control when the screen or what will trigger the screen reader to announce what is using another property called aria live, not aria live, aria relevant. And this aria relevant, it has a default value of additions and text, but it can like maybe trigger it only when a new text, a new DOM elements are added, maybe when some already existing DOM elements from this element, okay, only from this element, not on the whole page, are removed, when text is added, when text is removed, whatever. But we can go with the default value. The default value, by the way, is additions and text. So when we add a new DOM elements and when the text changes. So remove that. So inside this, we want to like here we want to put what we want the screen reader to say when we find the path. So we need to format the path from this format, which we just saw is an object with index as key and true as values, into a text format, which is easier to understand. So let's map first. Let's say object dot keys. I want to take the keys of this path. This will return an array of index values. I want to map over them index, and for each item, what can we say? I want to announce the row of this index and the column, but like not all of this, just this. Yes, it's saying that index will be string, so we can make that into an integer. Yeah, so we are just like turning the object into a list of indexes. They are string, so we are parsing them into integer. We are each index, we are computing the row index of it and the column. They are also, by the way, zero based, so we should add one. Column parse one, add one. Yes, and that's that. Let's try that out, shall we? And see how it works. Let's just first log this, see if it's computing it correctly or not. Right, okay, go back. Yeah, you can see it right here. It's breaking the visual. Go down, start. Here is the array. It's saying row 1, column 1, row 2, column 1, row 3, column 1. Okay, seems correct, I think. But we need to hide it from here, so we can do what we did earlier, which is adding a class name with an SR only value. Okay, so now but instead of just like nothing solution, let's just say the shortest path is something. Also, we might not want to show this unless there is a path that is found. When the grid is empty, I don't want to announce that. So let's say that path exists and path.length greater than 0, and let's store this in a variable, call it const path path labeled, not graded name, but it should be fine. be that path found. Be sure test path is, and here we can see path labeled and join it by comma path.length path close. The length property does not exist on path because path is an object, not an array. So instead we can say keys.length, or actually we can just say this labeled, because otherwise because it will exist always because it's an object. It can either have values or not. So yes, that should be everything. Let's save and see if it's working. Let's hit start. Let me turn the speech mode on.
Speech mode beeps. Speech mode talk. What table. Mazza builder document blank. Water piece. Table. Water. Start menu. Mazza builder document. Table. Path found. The shortest path is row 1, column 1, row 2, column 1, row 3, column 1, row 3, column 2, row 3, column 8, ground.
Great. It seems to be working correctly. If you check now
class
in the inspect menu, you can see
dev to column path found. Speech mode off.
And this is what text that the screen reader will say. Yeah, and now I think that should be almost everything. One other minor improvement we can make is, like, you saw when the screen reader is announcing this button, it's saying start magnifying glass. This is like not very useful for people who hear that, and it's also not very useful for people who don't know what this start button will do for sighted users. So like a better name could be find path or something like that. So we can do two things here actually. We can change the label, make it find path or find shortest path. And for magnifying a glass, maybe it makes sense for sighted users, but for users using screen readers, we should just hide that. And we can do that by, for example, using span and put it, and we can have an aria hidden property. This is actually the opposite of SR only class that we were using. SR only class will hide it from the DOM, hide it visually from the DOM, but the screen readers will still be able to see it. But this is the opposite. Aria hidden, it will like stay as it is in the render DOM, but the screen readers will just ignore this element. So now if you go here, inspect accessibility, and you will say that the label will be just find shortest path. It will not say magnifying glass anymore. Okay, what else? Let's see, settings, command, start button, settings. These are components from the material UI package, so they are like, luckily they are already accessible. You can like change the slider using the arrow keys. This is one of the benefits of using a components library that is already built, is that you do not need to manage these keyboard navigation things and accessibility things yourself. But it's good for you to know how they are implemented, because if you want to build something custom like a toolbox and there is no components library that provide a toolbox component that is accessible, you need to know how to build that yourself. Okay, I think that's everything for this session. Uh, Great work staying until the end. I know some of the stuff were not very easy, and maybe I have not explained some of this stuff very well. But I think if you like read the code again later, and read more about what we've built today, you should understand them better. And by the way, before I forget, one website that you should check out is ARIA Authoring Practices Guide, w3.org. Here, if you go to the patterns, you will see a lot of components, uh, common components that you might build, and they explain to you how they can be accessible and the way you can, like, how their keyboard interaction should look like, how their screen reader interaction should look like, etc. So I recommend checking out this website. And there are actually a couple of other websites that like uh, do the same thing. Like, you most likely, whatever component you want to build, most likely there already a lot of people built it and tried to make it accessible. So you don't need to like try to figure that on your own. Look for what other people have. How did they make this kind of component accessible, and just like do as what they did. Okay, so that's everything for now. I'll leave the code URL for you in the comments. Uh, Follow me on LinkedIn if you don't already. I post a lot of useful stuff there, stuff about React, front end, etc. And until next time, have a nice day.